I'd like to welcome you to the Pathways to Success podcast series. Today, I'm delighted to introduce Daniel Tannebaum, who is the America's Anti-Financial Crime Practice Lead and Partner at Oliver Wyman. Welcome, Daniel.
Thanks. Good to be here.
It'd be great if you could just provide a brief overview of your career to date.
Sure. So I've had a bit of a meandering path around the financial crime universe, but the one constant has been working almost exclusively in financial crimes related issues for nearly 2 decades now. I came up in this space at the U.S. Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC. From OFAC, I went to a small consulting firm in New York briefly, and then also went to the New York Fed, where I was brought in to help run AML and OFAC internally for the Federal Reserve. As I then moved back to industry, I took a role at Travelex as the head of compliance for the Americas, as part of an effort to restructure the North America compliance organization within Travelex, the foreign exchange company. After about 3 years, I left Travelex to come back to consulting. I decided to join Booz Allen Hamilton very briefly as they attempted to restart their commercial business, and then quickly joined PwC, where I was for 6 years as a partner in their financial services risk and regulatory practice. And now, to your point, I've been with Oliver Wyman for about 18 months and advise a wide range of multinational financial institutions, payments companies, crypto providers, as well as non-financial services companies in the technology space, logistics space, as well as in the energy and infrastructure space. Do a bit of work advising a number of governments in the financial crime space in terms of FATF mutual evaluation prep and national risk assessment work, and also advise private equity clients and other sponsors in investment and acquisition in the financial crimes compliance technology space. So a bit of a wordy journey through my path that's kind of covered off industry, government, and consulting.
What would you say are the challenges of transitioning from both government and industry into the consulting sector?
Biggest challenge is really how to translate the skills that you've acquired in your government space and leverage them differently. You may have been enforcing regulation or auditing a bank, examining a bank against certain regulatory standards. You're now retained by an institution to advise them. So it is a slight pivot in terms of the role that you're playing. When you're going from an in-house role, you may have helped design a strategy for AFC or run a strategy for AFC compliance, whether it's TM, sanction screening. But as an advisor, as a consultant, you may not have a full hand in the implementation of the strategies you hand off to a client to take forward. So you really need to account for the fact that you may not have the opportunity to see things through. And really your goal is to help get the client self-sustaining, so they don't need third-party support, so they're able to execute against the vision that you're able to assist them with. I guess the last thing is probably that there's a great hesitancy around the construct of selling that invariably comes with moving into professional services. And I think my main counsel would be, at least in the way that I've always thought about it, you're not selling copiers or reams of paper, you're selling experience. And that bit comes quite naturally, assuming you have experience to sell. And I have a client with an issue and a life experience from my career that can assist them in that problem. So to me, the selling happens naturally if you're able to communicate a way that you've lived through the same challenge that client is dealing with. And so the selling bit that gets a lot of people hung up tends to happen through natural discussion with clients of just solutioning through their issues.
Are there significant differences from a PwC Big Four environment to a market-leading strategic consulting firm?
On the whole, you're still solving client issues, so that bit remains the same. I think some of the differences are more structural in nature and potentially more of the focused mandate. So probably one of the most prominent differences is that most Big Four firms are not one firm. They're a collection of country-based legal entities operating under a common banner. And you may ask yourself, well, why does that really matter? And it actually does begin to matter when you're doing large cross-border complex projects where you may have 3, 4, 5 different companies technically trying to stitch themselves together to support a single client. Strategy firms typically operate as single global entities with less red tape, slowing cross-border execution. And when you think about big four firms, there's a wide-ranging business. You have first and foremost, those are public accounting firms as the heart of their business. They have tax functions and then obviously a consulting business. There's a lot of obvious focus, certainly in the UK right now, of how those businesses hang together. When you look to the strategy consulting firms, you don't necessarily have the mixed mandate, the mixed distraction of those very different lines of business that are all part of the same whole. In the strategy firm side, we tend to give folks more opportunities to explore different service offerings before picking a major per se, versus aligning to a specific topical area at quite a junior level. And that's kind of where you go. Obviously, you can move around, but we kind of have people pick their major, so to speak, a bit later in their progression at OW than what I saw in my prior life. And then lastly, I think on average, more of our mandates, at least in what I work with in the strategy space, come from on high, involve more senior level client management across the C-suite. Typically in a prior life, I was more one or two levels down from the C-suite in some of the engagements that we were serving. And we typically get brought in on the strategy side for more senior stakeholder involvement.
As somebody who kind of very much operates globally, for you, what are the biggest differences?
One of the biggest issues to account for is culture and how you're actually engaging. Now, it's a little easier for me to say, typically my issues that took me around the world were US-driven issues manifesting themselves in far-flung parts of the world, whether it was Russia, China, South Korea, the UAE. Now, I think you certainly have to try and put yourself in the client's shoes and manage the cultural sensitivities of having to deal with issues that some feel may be an infringement of the sovereignty of a business or a country. I know I got into it with a board member of a Taiwanese client a number of years ago when I was speaking at a board meeting, who basically began telling me I didn't know how to do business in his country, to which the response was, but you don't know how to do business in my country, which is the only reason I flew 8,000 miles. And that's really why we're talking today. So certainly trying to manage the sensitivities is important. I think you also have geopolitical issues afoot. Having done quite a bit of work in China and Russia, you now have conflict of law issues to contend with, where you really do have some legitimate operational challenges to attempt to execute certain work in a cross-border environment.
What would be your two top tips for an aspiring regulatory consultant?
First, there's no right path to becoming a regulatory consultant. And I've had a lot of people reach out to me over the years trying to kind of plot out like what is the right path. But there is no right path. I think, to me, kind of growing your experience is the key to whether you can come up in the consulting realm. Because if you really think about what you're selling as a consultant, it's your experience seeing a wide range of different outcomes and issues, and also how to solution them. So whether you're coming up from a government standpoint, from an in-house compliance role, or really growing up in the consulting realm, there's no wrong path, but really you need to focus on kind of building up your knowledge of some of the issues in the space that you're working with, obviously trying to build the commercial bone of how to market those services and to assist clients with them. But there really isn't a single right path would probably be the first point. I think second, having a keen interest in current events and being able to quickly think about the consequences of any regulatory actions. Obviously, a lot of what we deal with in this space is above the fold, newsworthy type issues that we're needing to react to. And I think the best consultants are the ones that can see an announcement come out of the British government, the EU, the US government, and really try and help distill down to clients quickly, what do you actually need to be thinking about as a result of what's happened today? And being able to manage that quickly is a very critical piece of being successful in the regulatory consulting space.
Thank you so much for your insight and time today. I think we're really privileged. I think this is obviously a space that Danos knows very well. And arguably, you're really the number one financial crime consultant globally out there. So I think that insight has been really helpful. And we really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.